Here we are on the second video about pandas. Let's dive into the second lesson about indexing, selecting, and assigning. This is a really important set of features to understand how the pandas library works. Let's dive into the first line of code, which is loading the pandas library, loading the data set of wine reviews, and setting the option to visualize a data frame, a maximum of 5 rows. We don't need to use print, just say the name of the data frame you created, and you can see the first 5 rows. In Kaggle notebooks, when you show a data frame, it shows the first few rows and the last few rows with dots in between to indicate around 130,000 rows. You can see the first couple and the last couple. And all the visible columns, 14 different columns showing attributes of each review. In this lesson, we're learning how to select parts of a data frame once it's loaded. In this data frame, the first column is country, where the wine is from. This line of code shows how to select that first column. You can do that by .country, similar to calling a function in a library. Another way is by putting the name of the column in quotes to make it a string and then putting it in brackets as well. Usually you would do this. Most of the time I do it this way just because sometimes the name of your column could have weird characters. You can go further by selecting an individual cell. So this is almost the same thing in the spreadsheet. You have your cursor, you select a cell, you can select the name of a column, and adding brackets with 0 is going to select the first item in that column. So in this case, Italy. If we go back up here to the top, you can see in the first row in the first column, Italy. This allows us to pull data out of our data frames and use it in logic and operations. Columns, index or indices are the names of the rows. If we run this line of code using a pandas function called LOC, we'll pull out the first row indicated by this column and 0. You can see the names of the columns here on the left: country, Italy, description, variety, wine blend, white blend, winery, Nicosia. So you can see it's pulling out the first row as a row type of index object. In this next chunk of code using .illoc, we wanted to see how to get a column. It's more tricky than just calling the column name. You use 2 arguments within ILOC brackets, a colon for all rows and a comma 0 for the first column. This way you're getting the data from the country column without calling the country column. So you might have noticed in these lessons that the colon operator in Python means everything. You're selecting, if you remember how to select parts of a list, a colon was used to select the whole group. Here, we're selecting the first 3 rows. There's nothing before the colon, but after the colon, there's a 3. So you're selecting the first 3. The 0 indicates the first column. You can also get from index 1 through 3. What's between the second and third row? You can pass a list to i.loc to get those first 3 rows, 0, 1, and 2, which gives you Italy, Portugal, and US. Just like in lists, you can use .iloc to extract the last rows. If we want the last 5 rows, the index here is almost 130,000. You're getting the last 5 rows of this data set. You can also use a different function called LOC. It's a little bit more confusing. .loc versus ILOC. So .alloc allows you to use column names in addition to row numbers. We looked at pulling out the first cell in the first row of the first column. This is another way of using .loc. ILOC is more simple than LOC because it ignores dataset indices. .loc is more complex. You can indicate column names, not just index numbers. I generally use .loc. .iloc gives you more power, especially if the names of your columns are, you can use .iloc, but usually I use .loc. There's a difference between the indices that are used. Make sure you read through that to understand the differences. So in this next subsection, we talk about manipulating the index, which means setting and changing it. Maybe we want to remove the previous index and set it to a different column. In our original data set, we had a column called title. Now we've set that index to that column. You can change the column to sort or filter the data frame based on this column, often a unique identifier for each row. For wine reviews, the review name is the index would be logical. Setting the index lets you select rows based on column contents like searching or filtering. Conditional selection is filtering within pandas. We have this .country notation. We're asking pandas within the country column for reviews from Italy. You get a Boolean series, but it's not the names of the countries, just whether each road is Italy or not. Nest that code into .lock to find all rows that are Italy, getting a subset of the larger data set. In this case, almost 20,000 rows out of 300,000 have Italian wine reviews. This is super powerful. With these massive data sets, we can create subsets using .loc and filtering. Super powerful. You can also chain conditionals. Here we want to say it's Italy and good wine with review points over 90 on a scale from 0 to 100. So about 6,600 wines from Italy have a rating of 90 or above. You can see the power to find data and subsets. But you can say and, which is above, or use or. So it's either in Italy or has over 90 points, resulting in over 60,000 rows, just different comparisons. Maybe you don't want to know exactly what's in that row. You can use a function called .isin. We want to know if the words Italy or France are used in that review. So maybe you don't have a column for country and you want to infer that using a different column. I use .isin. So this selections and conditional statements all the time with messy data frames. Is null finds and removes any row with no price. Not null means it's not empty. That's useful for removing empty data out of 300,000 rows. 120,000 might not be empty. You can also assign in data frames, assigning data to a data frame. Here, create a new column called critic and fill it with the string everyone. You can create critic and fill that with everyone. Instead of every row having the same word, use logic to create actual data. In this case, you're just reversing the index. We'll discuss more about in future lessons.